Dre from Dragon Consulting, and today I would like to continue the conversation about workarounds. So if you're returning to the channel, welcome back, and if you're new, welcome. So in our first two videos in this series, we talked about some of the key reasons that users create workarounds in a healthcare environment, as well as some of the key impacts. And today I'd like to talk about how we evaluate, or some of the questions that we have when we discover that a workaround is being used. So just a reminder of the definition that we're using, and that's that a workaround is an alternative path to accomplishing a task or a series of tasks that somehow differs from the intended or designed process. So when we identify the use of a workaround in our environment, it's critical that we evaluate that. And that's so that we can understand what the impacts are, if there are any, as well as to remedy or formalize the situation as needed. Some questions along the way that you're going to want to ask in order to evaluate are on the next few slides. So first and foremost, is the user group performing the workaround to accomplish a previously defined workflow? So is there a workflow that actually had a process that was outlined, and are they doing something different? Is it in fact a workaround? If it is, then is the correct workflow or the defined workflow documented somewhere? So was it written down, or was it something that was just verbally discussed and not actually formalized? And if it wasn't formalized, you may not be able to classify it as a workaround, and you may just have an education issue on your hands. So the next one is, are the users knowledgeable of the defined process? If it is in fact documented and written down, are they aware of that? Do they know what the process is and what steps they're supposed to follow? So there may be an instance where the education or communication has a gap, and you need to sort of take a look at that. Maybe that's why the workaround is in place. So if that's not the case, you'll want to ask the next question, and that is, why are they using the workaround? So why is it actually being performed? And for a list of the reasons, you'll want to refer back to the previous posts where I discussed sort of some of the key reasons users create them. One of the next things that you'll want to take a look at is if the workaround is being done by a single user or a small group of users, or if it's actually something that's being performed by large groups of people in a widespread type situation. So are there multiple roles that are completing it, multiple departments? Is it your whole organization that's actually taken it on? So the magnitude of the workaround will help you to determine sort of how to respond to it in the best way, and how the communication and education around any further rollouts or any changes will take place. So is the workaround something that's in place for a temporary time frame? So are you experiencing some functionality issues with one of your applications, and there's a brief period of time where a workaround is being used? Or is this something that the users are intending to use longer term? So is this a new path that's been created, or a desired sequence of steps that's being done that they would like to continue? So it's important that you understand if there's a time frame around this. If it is something that is just meant to be in place for the short term, it's very different than if it's something that users are attempting to commit to or wanting to commit to long term. Is the workaround with a standalone or a single task? Is it simply one action that's being done differently? Or does it actually trigger a series of tasks that need to also be done differently in subsequent manner? So is it one drop-down choice that's missing and they're selecting other and free texting in? Or are they actually skipping the use of a section of documentation altogether and putting information somewhere different, so that users down the road actually have to look in a different spot, and to trend, they have to continue and perpetuate that workaround? So it's important to know whether it's standalone or whether it's actually starting a cascade of events. Along that same line, you'll want to understand if the workaround is contained to a single system, or if it's actually involving multiple systems. So is the action that's being done differently, or the path that's being taken differently, is that actually causing any data or information to connect to other systems in a different way, or fail to connect, so that there are impacts or subsequent changes that are being done in connected systems. So once you've asked all these questions and got some of the basic guidelines around the workaround sort of documented and understood, the next thing you want to do is fully assess that workaround to determine whether it's favorable or unfavorable in your environment. So again, they can be both positive and negative. A lot of them tend to be more on the negative side. However, there certainly are positive workarounds out there. So when you're doing the assessment, some of the key considerations that you'll want to focus on are, does the workaround result in improved efficiency when it's compared to the documented flow? So is it actually making the process more efficient, either from a number of users performing tasks perspective, from a timeline perspective, from a turnaround perspective? So is it resulting in quicker turnarounds and diagnostic results, things like that? Is there efficiency that's being sort of improved along the path in some way? Does the workaround result in improvements to the patient care process? So are there any changes that are occurring or things that can be, quantifiably measured from a patient care perspective from an end-to-end with that workaround in place? Or are there improvements to patient satisfaction? So are there patient, family, caregiver improvements that are occurring even if there's no efficiency? So is there some sort of change that's happening from that perspective? Are there any policy or regulatory concerns that sort of in play with the workaround? And with this, you will want to look at the full breadth of the workaround, especially if it is cascading and causing additional workarounds or triggering changes in other systems. So is there anything along the pathway that has regulatory or policy concerns? You'll want to take a look at those. Does the workaround create any technical issues? So as you look at sort of all components of the workaround, anywhere the data is going, is everything flowing correctly? Are there any sort of issues that are occurring along the way? Is there any data missing? Is there any sort of truncation that's happening? Any gaps in the actual records? And does the workaround align with organizational goals and strategies? So one of the workarounds that comes to mind is if users are reverting back to paper processes. So if they're not actually utilizing the EHRs or an electronic format of completing something, if they're actually reverting back as a workaround because they believe it's quicker, does that align with your organizational goals? And an example of this would be the one I discussed in the previous video, where order reconciliation being done on paper was perceived to be a lot quicker, and individuals were completing it on paper for a little bit of time instead of doing it in the system. And that actually did have some regulatory concerns with meaningful use goals we were trying to meet, and it also didn't align with the organizational goals of being fully electronic and off paper. So if after the assessment a workaround is determined to be unfavorable, that would mean it causes technical issues that cannot be overcome in a short time frame. So technical issues that are quite challenging and are causing some form of errors or disruptions along the way, or that it leads to downstream impacts that are presenting risks to patient care processes or workflow efficiencies. So if it's causing any gaps in the care record, if it's causing something to slow down or challenges along the way, then your workaround may be one that is unfavorable. If it's an unfavorable workaround that you have discovered, the next steps for the organization or for those that are responding to it should be to decide how to prevent use of the workarounds. If that is going to be done just on an educational basis, if there are any guidelines or policies that need to be adjusted, if there are any technical changes that need to be made to prevent the incorrect path from being taken or the undesirable path from being taken. And along with those determinations, you'll also want to create some education and appropriate communication to educate users on the process. So you don't want to ever change a workaround that's in place or deny users a workaround path without actually communicating what the desired or correct path is. So you will want to make sure that you do both of those hand in hand if the workaround is determined to be unfavorable. Now, if you have a favorable workaround, meaning you show improvements to process efficiency or patient outcomes, or to patient experiences and things like that. So you're actually seeing benefits and sort of real improvements, either in behavior or culture, or in timing, in outcomes, things like that. And you don't have any policy or regulatory concerns, so everything that's happening along the way is compliant, everything aligns with your strategies, and there are no technical issues, or any technical issues that you've got can be overcome in a fairly simplistic way. So a couple tweaks to the system or some minor changes to reports, things like that can easily be accommodated, can be done. Then you'll determine your workaround as one that is favorable and that you will look to formalize and hopefully roll out to larger groups of people. So if that's the case, next steps for this would be to communicate this as the alternative and to define the process so that it can be educated. And as with everything that you're going to change, you'll want to update any of your documentation that's relevant. So make sure your test scripts, your training materials, all your communications, your downtime stuff, everything actually will refer to the sort of new updated workaround that you're going to roll out to get your improvements. So that is what you'll do to evaluate and assess workarounds. So thank you for joining me today, and if you like what you see, feel free to subscribe to the channel or leave some comments below, and I'd also love to hear about some new topics that you guys would like to hear about. So I do have one more video on workarounds to get to, and that is some of the operational activities that you'll put in place if workarounds do exist in your environment. So stay tuned for that one, and have a great day.